purpose of this film is twofold. One is to look at interesting features on the landscape, and particularly one I found in the mountains in Sligo that are dismissed by archaeologists, but I think that they have not been properly investigated. And the reason why I'm picking this particular one is because it's referred to locally as the Giant's Grave. There are so-called Giant's Graves, stated in quotation marks, that exist all over Ireland. Generally, these are ancient souterrains. A souterrain is a small, rather small, in fact, box lined with stones under the ground that's, according to archaeologists and historians, was for storing root vegetables and so forth over the winter months. And this would have been an impossible place for storage, as these souterrains would have rotted away anything that's inside them. They're often built in areas that are in the shallows within valleys or at the bottoms of hills where all the groundwater runs into them. The other theory is that people hid in them when the Vikings attacked. Now, this is nonsense as well, because it would have been very easy to light a fire at the opening and kill the people inside of asphyxiation and then go inside and take whatever they had. More like when Vikings attacked and other groups attacked, people just ran off into the woods, into the mountains, and they hid in the shrubs and hedgerows and undergrowth. This particular structure here, before I talk about it, I want to talk about the idea of giants. The idea that these giant humanoids could have once existed is something I've always found very, very intriguing. If you look at universal archetypes, there are three which appear in almost all cultures globally. The first is dragons, or some kind of large reptilian flying creature. The second is invisible spirits or other forms of intelligent consciousness, such as the fairies, the jinn, and so on. And finally, there's giants. Giants seem to be as universal around the world as the previous two I just mentioned. This is what makes giants so interesting. There's lots of ways of looking at the idea of what a giant is. Is a giant a large humanoid similar to the ones portrayed in the Game of Thrones TV series? I find this idea highly unlikely. The largest man that ever lived, his name was Robert Wadlow. He lived in the United States and he died in 1940. He was nearly 10 feet tall. His life was very difficult due to health problems caused by his enormous size. Healing from things like blisters was very difficult. His heart simply could not effectively pump enough oxygen around his body, and this kept him in quite a difficult life, although this man maintained a rather gracious and affable personality during his short life. So it's highly unlikely that there were giants of this size living on the earth, humanoids larger than 8 or 9 feet tall. The reason for this is gravity will crush their internal organs. This is why blue whales and other creatures live in the oceans, for that simple reason that the buoyancy allows them to grow larger. Now this brings up another interesting aspect. In many mythologies, I'll just use the Irish Gaelic mythology for example, giants often are associated with the sea, such as the Fomorians, such as Balor of the Evil Eye, the one-eyed giant, leader of the Fomorians from Tory Island, who, during the epic Battle of Moytura in South Sligo, was slain by Lu, the god of the long arm, after he had previously killed Nuada of the silver arm. The Fomorians are associated with the sea. Likewise are some other stories surrounding sea fairies and selkies and so on. But there has to be something to this idea of giant humanoids. We often see photographs appearing on the internet. They're clearly Photoshop fakes of men beside giant skulls and so on. Again, these human beings, unless gravity was different in the past, would not have been able to exist, simply because the stress and weight on their internal organs would make it very difficult for them to function in a humanoid skeletal structure. Maybe, perhaps, they had a different kind of skeletal structure that was an exoskeleton structure. It's probably the reason why we found no bones. Maybe it was made of a matter similar to something like a beetle shell or an ant's or surface. It decays much more easily than calcium bones. everywhere, in every culture, the stories of giants. Which brings me to this remarkable structure I stumbled upon about 15 years ago up in the Ox Mountains in County Sligo. At first it's difficult to see because it blends very, very well in amongst the landscape. Fairly remote. When I first saw it, the first thing I thought was that it was some kind of Neolithic structure, a megalith of some kind, perhaps a buried cord cairn. I have tried to get up to it on several occasions, but the ground around it is incredibly boggy. Even in the height of summer, it is often saturated and very difficult to access. The closest I've been to it is about 50 to 100 meters, and then it's just impossible to get to. Now, according to the official record, this was first properly explored in 1996, and it was determined to be an enclosed natural hill, a scarp, with an external field ditch. The earliest map I can find of this was about 1870. Previous maps to it, it's not on it because the topography illustrated in the early maps of Ireland, especially in this area due to its remoteness, were not fully rendered. What made me especially interested was looking back at older photographs of this through the Irish Ordnance Survey website, in particular one photograph that not only shows the mound itself more clearly and also its almost perfect ovular shape, but also you can see that there's an external ring around it, which was not investigated by the archaeologists. So this just made this anomaly more intriguing to me. What I find particularly interesting is why would somebody go to the trouble of dressing what appears to be dressed stonework at the bottom of the mound, very similar to the stones lining places such as Newgrange and Knowth in the east coast of Ireland. It makes no sense that a natural hill, which is perfectly shaped just by chance, which does happen, I agree, but why would someone, if it meant nothing and had no religious or spiritual or other significant purpose, why would they go to the trouble of surrounding it with this ditch and what seems to be stonework? I think this mound deserves a much more thorough investigation, especially in light of the fact that this orbital structure that's buried around it has not been properly investigated, is not mentioned in either the Sligo or the Irish National Archaeological Database. Just the mound itself is mentioned in the national database and it's dismissed as just being a hill with no purpose. And then this brings us back again to why do people believe in giants? Why do they believe that giants live and they exist? It's too common an archetype and there has to be something to it. People in this part of Ireland and around the world, they'll often refer to dolmens as giants' tables. The giant, like the dragon, like the non-material conscious entity, is part and parcel of our human culture and development, and there has to be something to it. There's no other reason why when people see structures such as this in the past would refer to them as giants' graves and so forth. If there's one mysterious phenomena from our past that I'm quite willing to indulge, that at one time some kinds of giants, however they looked, however they functioned, or whatever their biology was, once walked or swam across the globe of this earth.